series that you'll listen to, you'll find that when they talk about the Isra and Mi'raj, it's a little bit, it's quicker. It's like usually one session and it's over. I take more time to talk about the Mi'raj specifically because I think there's a lot in that story to reflect upon. And I know I'm using my imagination a little bit, but I'm not using it wildly outside of the realm of what is logical, what makes sense. Meaning the Prophet ﷺ was set up to meet certain people. There's a reason why he was going to meet these people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't randomly have him meet people. There's nothing random in the story. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted him to meet certain people for specific reasons. And with a little bit of tadabbur, a little bit of ta'ammul, a little bit of contemplation, you can figure out why he's meeting these people specifically. Every Nabi that he met, there was something for him to learn alayhi salatu wasalam from this encounter that he had with them. And even though we don't have a lot of narrations that tell us what they talked about, I just kind of go out of my I imagine what they talked about, and I use basically the stories of the prophets themselves and what the Prophet ﷺ had gone through, or what he was going to go through in his life, that would make this encounter very meaningful to him ﷺ. And I think there's value in talking about that. And the reason that he got to go on this journey ﷺ was mainly for a couple of reasons. The first one was that he was going through probably the darkest moments of his life, of his entire life. And he said that I'm not saying it's his words. That he felt that this was the most difficult time. He lacked a clear plan moving forward, and he felt that he had lost a lot of support from inside the house and from outside the house. And after maybe 9 to 10 years of da'wah, this is the 10th year of his da'wah, 10 years of da'wah, which is a decade of time. After a decade of work, I'm sure that he was reflecting ﷺ upon the output, the outcome. How many people did he actually have? What was he able to achieve in 10 years? I believe the Prophet ﷺ looked at what he had achieved, and he wasn't thrilled by it. Not that he wasn't happy with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him, but I'm sure because the way the Prophet ﷺ was, and this is what we have to learn, he was someone who was very self-aware, and he performed a lot of self-accountability. He always held himself accountable. So he always went back and wondered what he could have done better. Was he doing this as well as he could? Should he be doing more? Did he make mistakes? What mistakes did he make? That was his nature, alayhi salatu wasalam. It's a really good nature to have, as long as when you do that, you're not someone who uses self-accountability to feel less about themselves or to lose self-esteem. We're going to use that instead of this? Yeah. Okay. Old school rules. Reminds me of my teachers, though. Microphone stuck in their faces. They never liked it. Now I know why. Is it? Yeah, sounds like it's not. So if you think about it, 10 years is a decade of time. Is a long time. Like it's not a short period of time. After a decade, if you were to do a quick review of what was the Prophet ﷺ able to do, to actually achieve, you find that in 10 years, not that much. Islam is scattered over in Mecca and in Habasha. The number of Muslims is barely 300, 350 people. Barely. Yeah, not even that much. He has not made a lot of progress with the leaders of the land. There are no true leaders, as in the head of their tribes who have accepted Islam with him. He has not been able to influence the nobles of Quraysh almost at all, aside from maybe Abu Bakr and Umar, who were with him, technically speaking, from a long time before. Not much else. He had not put together a lot of wealth from the people that he had. He wasn't able to free the slaves that had believed in him. When you look at the accomplishments, it wasn't that impressive. And I'm sure the Prophet ﷺ was feeling that way as well. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. We have to be, in our lives, we have to be reasonable in how in what method we hold ourselves accountable. You can't have metrics that don't make any sense. So the Prophet ﷺ, being someone who held himself accountable, and look at the last 10 years and go like, I don't know if I done this the way I should, or I haven't really come that far. If anything, things are getting worse. Like over the last couple of years, you had to send people to Habasha, then the boycott happened, then Khadija dies, and then Abu Talib dies, and now Abu Talib says no, and he doesn't really, and he's being threatened to be killed. Like it went at the beginning of the da'wah, he wasn't being threatened, now he's being threatened to be killed. reflect and to contemplate, to ask yourself, am I doing the best I can? Is this the best I can do? Can I do any more? And I think he was at a moment in his life, alayhi salatu wasalam, 10 years into the story where he felt, I don't know if this is, he was starting to feel, there was a negative feeling in his heart, alayhi salatu wasalam. And what was the grief that was occurring? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called him to the heavens. He took him to Masjid al-Aqsa to see where a lot of this began and where a lot of this initiated, where he would officially be carrying the baton moving forward in terms of the concept of Tawheed. And then he was called to the heavens where he would go and see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in store. The reverence and the respect that he had out of his there, and he got to meet people of such high caliber to tell him that, don't worry, sometimes the first 10 years suck. Sometimes you'll spend a decade with very little to show. Sometimes you'll work day and night for a full decade and you won't have a lot to show for it. It's okay. It happens all the time. And I think he needed to hear that from different people. And I find that the reason that I do the Mi'raj this way is because I contemplated, why did he meet these people specifically? Like, there were a couple of prophets that I'm like, I don't know why he's meeting them. Like, why is he meeting Fulan? Like, why isn't he meeting someone else? Like, I had names in my mind. Like, he doesn't meet, who's a prophet that he doesn't meet that's one of the major prophets of all, one of the major messengers? Noah, right? Noah, he doesn't meet Noah. Like, if he's going by the prophets based on their status, I would assume he would meet Noah. He didn't meet Noah. He's going to meet Idris though. So I'm like, why? Is Muslim busy? No, he didn't meet Noah. He just didn't, right? Now, is there no value in being? Of course there's value in being Noah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made choices. Yeah? As if each of the prophets, not as if, each of the prophets had something in their story that he needed to hear out of Islam. That was important for him. That was going to affect his story out of Islam specifically. So when you look at that, I find that to be just very interesting. So the first guy, obviously, was going to be Adnan Rajeh, where he met the father of all of humanity. The reminder that all human beings, everyone that you're sent to teach, Ya Muhammad, are siblings. They're all relatives. You see, he wasn't sent to the sheep of Israel. He wasn't sent to Bani Israel, or just to the Arab, or to Quraysh. No, he was sent to humanity. So he would meet Adam first as a reminder, he's the father of everyone who was supposed to receive your message. Remind yourself that you guys are all just one big family. And he's the first Khalifa, He's the first person who ever heard the word Khalifa, ever. So meeting him was going to be important because there's value in meeting the person who was given the job the first time around. If you're going to inherit a job, maybe meet the person who did the job before you. Or maybe meet the person who came up with the job. Meet the one who was given who this job was designed for to begin with. You go to the source and hear what the job looked like to begin with, and it gives you an authentic understanding of it. And then Adam alayhi salam was that he solved the problem for all of us. Adam alayhi salam is a story that we're all supposed to learn from. Once you learn the story of Adam, you have very little after that to complain about or to give excuses to yourself when you don't do well. Because you just go back to the story. Every mistake we make, one way or the other, goes back to the story of Adam alayhi salam. Very simply. We're not that complicated. It's a desire and an entitlement. It's the nafs not wanting something or wanting something. That's not his best interest. The nafs is your biggest groupie. The nafs loves you. The nafs sees nothing but you. It is in love with you. And it cares only for you. It cares about nothing else but you. The nafs is just not very intelligent. Forgive me. It's a little bit ignorant. The nafs doesn't know what's in your best interest. It thinks that wealth and fame and immortality, that's in your best interest. That's what it thinks. It thinks that there's a lot of food, you should get the most. That's how much the nafs loves you. No, you should get the most. So it makes you feel very greedy, that you want everything. Now, it's not because the nafs hates you, it loves you, it just doesn't know any better. So your job is not to hate your nafs. Your job is to purify your nafs, teach it. It's not, you don't destroy it, you don't kill it. It's you. No one will ever love you as much as your nafs loves you. But your nafs doesn't really know what's best for you. So Adam alayhi salam, his nafs was like that. He wanted everything, and he didn't know how to deal with that. So he made a mistake. He touched something he shouldn't have, and then he learned, so that's the relationship I have here. So I have to. It's like you have your biggest fan. just cheering you on all the time, but not always cheering you on towards the right direction. So you have to be patient. Say, no, we're going to do this. Your nefs doesn't understand late rewards. It's like a child. It's like a 3-year-old. I can tell my son Hamza, okay, you'll get this later. The word later doesn't have a meaning in his mind yet. He doesn't comprehend later. What do you mean later? He only understands now. Later is not something they comprehend yet. So the nefs doesn't understand later. It takes a long time for you to educate that, we're taking care of me. I love me too, just like you do, but this is not in our best interest. If we do this, then we get punished for what we have. If we do this, we get rewarded, it'll be great later. The concept of later doesn't really work immediately, it takes time. So Adam was the first human to kind of start feeling, there's more to me than just my consciousness. There's something else inside here. A voice that seems to be very certain about things. A voice that seems to know it all. No, this is what we're going to do. And it seems to be very pushy too. How do I deal with it? So Adam learned. So Adam shared the pure, authentic teachings of the Prophet during that meeting. The second guy, he would go and meet Isa and Yahya, Ibn al-Khala, alayhim as-salatu was-salam. Ibn al-Khala, they were cousins, Isa and Yahya. So, and when I say they're not first cousins, they're second cousins. So, Maryam, alayhi salam, does not have a sibling, but her mother had a sibling. Her mother's sibling was married to Zakaria, alayhi salam. Right? So Zakaria, alayhi salam, was granted Yahya. So Yahya and Isa are cousins through their mothers. So Maryam Maryam is Yahya's cousin, and Isa is Yahya's second cousin, basically. So Maryam alayhi salam, Maryam al-Adwa, and Yahya are first cousins, and then Isa is the son of Maryam, so they're cousins, second cousins, basically. That's making sense to you. And they were sent as prophets and messengers at the same time. Like they were both messengers at the same period of time, in the same space, for the same people as well. But there was a lot of overlap between them. And I think it's the only sky where he meets two people. I'm sure he could have met two people in other skies. I know with certainty that there are Anbiya in all the skies, so he could have met two people. It's the only time he met two people, alayhi salatu wasalam. He met Isa and Yahya. And the reason he met them is because they were relatives, and they were doing the same thing, yet they loved one another, and they worked well with one another, and they respected each other. And even though Isa alayhi salam was younger than Yahya, Isa had higher status than Yahya alayhi salam. And John and Jesus is much more revered than John will ever be. And that didn't cause any degree of hasad, didn't cause envy, didn't cause animosity. They didn't all each go open their own masjid and run their own thing away from each other. No, they stayed and they worked with one another. So for him to see that, in my opinion, was very, very valuable to see that you can easily work with people and revere them and respect them. They could be younger than you, they could be related to you, you can still have that relationship with them. Another reason is that Isa is the prophet of Christianity, which is going to be a big deal in his life, and for his ummah later on. The relationship this ummah has with Christians and Jews is a big deal. We're all part of an Abrahamic faith. Meaning our faiths go back to people who descend from Ibrahim alayhi salam. It doesn't mean that we all have the same beliefs today. That's not what I'm saying. But did Musa and Isa not preach exactly what Muhammad preached? Of course, they preached the same thing. The books are obviously not the way they were supposed to be sent, but they all taught Tawheed, like the other prophets. But there's that connection to Ibrahim alayhi salam, which makes it, and obviously the followers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that the followers of these faiths, one way or the other, would have the most influence on the planet. So knowing Isa alayhi salam and actually putting a face to the name and speaking to him was important to make that connection. That we as Muslims, we see and we revere the prophets of these other faiths very, very highly. We don't, and that's an important distinction to make when we talk about this. Isa and Yahya both underwent extreme oppression. They were both, Isa, when they tried to crucify him, and they believed that they did, right? Yahya alayhi salam was murdered after he saw his father Zakaria. He saw it when he was hiding in a tree. They went through oppression of extreme nature, losing their lives. And it's a reminder for him alayhi salatu wasalam, that prophets like you before you went through something similar. And as you are going through this, they're trying to kill you, you've been mistreated. He was just, the cuts on his feet, alayhi salatu wasalam, from the journey of Ta'if had not healed yet during the meeting he had with Isa and Yahya. So he was still feeling the pain of his bruises, alayhi salatu wasalam. to meet two people who were both hunted down by their own, hunted down by those who were related to them, and murdered by them. Isa alayhi salam obviously there's this distinction, but that was the intention at least of what they did. They also both had similar characteristics. And Isa alayhi salam, what is he known for? Like if you were to go and speak to Christians, and we don't need them to ask them that question, but let's say, what is he known for within the faith that claims to follow him? He is known for his mercy. He is known for his humbleness. He is known for his wisdom, right? So the Prophet, and of course that's how we see Isa alayhi salam, and that's how we revere him. So the Prophet alayhi salam got to meet Isa and meet someone who was extremely oppressed, who lived a very poor lifestyle, like in terms of finances. They weren't rich, and who was filled with mercy, filled with compassion, filled with humbleness, with humility, with just being someone who does not have that, and meeting him alayhi salam would be of extreme benefit. I love this story that we have. Ibn Kathir has it in his tafsir, and it comes from the Israeliyat. Ka'b al-Ahbar tells us the story. Whenever Ka'b al-Ahbar tells a story, as long as there's nothing in it that contradicts our faith, I like to share it, because he's one of the Sahaba who learned the stories of Bani Israel, and then he told us what he thought was reasonable. So I always like. So one of the stories is where Isa alayhi salam is walking on a road with one of his apostles, and someone would call upon Isa alayhi salam using a bad name. They would call him, "Oh, you this," and call his mother something. Right? Very, very rude. So Isa alayhi salam would turn to him and he would say, "Barakallahu lak, wa fatahallahu alayk, wa ahsanallahu." And he would make dua for him. So the apostle is like, "Oh, ya Ruh Allah, I don't think you heard me. I don't think you heard what he said. I think you probably misheard what he was saying." So Isa looked at him and he literally said, "Qala kullun yukhriju mimma indah." Everyone produces from whatever they have on the inside. Everyone projects whatever they have on the inside. He projected what he had on the inside, and I'll project what I have on my inside. He had all that hatred and that rudeness. I don't have that. So this is who he's talking to, alayhi salatu wasalam. Someone of that degree of humbleness and mercy and humility. They both stood up to tyrants. Isa and Yahya, both of them stood up to tyrants during their time. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was facing that. He was facing tyrants. Quraysh, sometimes it takes a challenge to bring the tyrant out of someone. Quraysh didn't seem like they were tyrants, but it took his approach to reform alayhi salatu wasalam to bring out the tyrants that they truly were. Be careful about that, by the way. This is my advice to you. Question yourself. Make sure that there's no sleeping tyrant inside of you that's just waiting to be provoked, to be brought forward. Because when there's no friction, you sit there nicely, you seem like a nice person. You seem awesome. But then it takes a little bit of friction and it brings up the tyrant that has been hiding inside all along. This happens a lot. Your son marries a lady and you don't like her. You end up, you run a course and one of the helpers don't follow along appropriately, or your students aren't listening to what you have to say, or your children disobey you on something, and be careful. Hold yourself accountable. Make sure you don't have a sleeping tyrant that's being waited to be awakened. Quraysh was a sleeping tyrant. They would turn into that. They're already there 10 years in, but no, they're going to get worse. This is not the worst amount of oppression he's going to undergo from Quraysh. No. Quraysh is going to basically pay all of Arabia and build the biggest army that the subcontinent had seen to go and try and annihilate him. I'm going to tell you the story of Muhammad. So they still they have not brought out the worst in themselves yet. So the Prophet ﷺ met Yahya and Isa, were both people who dealt with tyrants, who stood up to tyranny and did not and were not afraid, and basically gave their lives for it. Basically lost their lives because they stood up against tyrants of their land. And the Prophet ﷺ had to see that, it didn't work out for us. And we stood up against tyranny, it didn't work out. Yahya didn't work out for him. Isa didn't work out for him, at least not during his life. And you can't really say that Christianity today is evidence that it worked out for Isa, because they're not following Tawheed. Isa would not be happy with this, and he's going to be held accountable. He was going to ask about it. People are worshiping him. That's not what he taught. He didn't teach this. It was not something that he's looking forward to anyways. So he needed to see that, look, people of high caliber, people of high kuffars in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lived lives where they went through a full story of da'wah with very little to show for at the end of it, and lost their lives against standing against tyranny and still didn't achieve anything, and that's okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still loves them. So he needed to see that alayhi salatu wasalam for his own the comfort of his own heart. He would go to the third sky alayhi salatu wasalam, third heaven. Who's in there? Anyone can blurt out the name there? Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. So it'd be Yusuf alayhi salam. And I thought, I remember when we were studying this, so why Yusuf specifically? Why not Yaqub, his father, for example? There's so many stories for Yaqub to say. There's a couple of reasons why he met Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. There's a lot of similarities between the story of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and the story that Yusuf alayhi salam had. Yusuf alayhi salam ruled a foreign land. Right? Yusuf alayhi salam had to leave his family, and he was in Egypt, obviously, and he became one of the rulers of Egypt. Yusuf is not from Egypt, alayhi salatu wasalam. He became the ruler of a foreign land, which is what's going to happen to him, alayhi salatu wasalam, very soon. Very soon, the Prophet alayhi salam doesn't know it yet. He's going to be ruling a land where he was not born, and where he does not have a lot of ties, and where he is ethnically does not belong. He doesn't belong in Yathrib. I'll explain this to you in more detail once we tell the story. He doesn't belong in Yathrib. He had some relatives on the far side of his grandmother's cousins. So there was some connection, but really he was not born there. And the people living there ethnically are very different than him. The Arab are two separate ethnic groups, very separate. They only meet at Nuh alayhi salam. The Qahtaniyin, the Adnaniyin, they don't really meet anywhere else. So they're very, very separate. Culturally, they speak the same language, but culturally, ethnically, and even for principle and value-wise, they're just different people. So they didn't get along very much. So people stayed away from one another when it came to ongoing alliances. So the Prophet was going to be ruling a foreign land. So he met Yusuf alayhi salam. There's a lot of lessons there to learn. What it takes to rule a foreign land, what it takes to win over people that don't necessarily identify with you as indigenous. There was a lot there for him alayhi salatu wasalam to pick up. Yusuf alayhi salam is a long-term planner in the Quran, right? Yusuf alayhi salam, how did he get out of jail? He got out of jail when the king saw the dream, and in the dream or in this vision, he saw that there was going to be cows eating other cows, and he saw this dream. Yusuf alayhi salam knew he understood what it meant, so he gave them this long-term plan. He was going to do these 7 years of ease, a lot of rain, and a lot of crop, and then 7 years after that's not going to go well. So you're going to need to plan things up. For the first 7 years, you guys eat and then you store grain. You store it well so it doesn't get ruined. And then once the 7 years of difficulty come along, you're going to distribute the grain fairly based on numbers of people. And people have to actually bring something in for it. They have to work. It's not going to be free social support. Not that I'm against social support in any of the countries that we live in, but I think there has been some degree of clarity here, and I'm going to throw my hat into the political ring here. I'm not running for anything, but I don't think that social support should be completely free. I don't think the concept of someone not doing absolutely nothing and taking money is healthy for the human psyche or the human heart. It's not healthy for you to be here. You don't have to do anything at all. You have to contribute something. You have to contribute something. Unless you are of a certain age where you're retired and you've already contributed all your life, you have to be contributing something. And I think the concept of that existing without any form of contributions is a problem. If you're studying that's one thing, but for there to be nothing at all. And this is a problem that countries like our own are going to run into. If we continue this culture where we are going to hand out cash to people, under social equity, or without there being any form of contribution, participation, or anything that is coming back, then not only will our economy suffer and our currency suffer, and not only will it become impossible to rent a place to live, or to buy a car, or to buy a house, or to make ends meet at the end of the month, we'll run into problems that go way beyond that. So there has to be. So he planned things out for them. In jail, he sent them a full, comprehensive plan of what they were going to do to maintain their country and make sure people didn't starve. That long-term planning is of value. That's a piece that, as Muslims today, we struggle with. The Prophet ﷺ spent some time with Yusuf ﷺ, where he got to hear someone talk about this stuff. You have to run a country, you have to have long-term plans. Like you have to figure out what you're going to do in order to support people and get people to support themselves and make sure that you keep the country actually functional. So he spoke to him in the language of economics. Yusuf ﷺ in the Quranic book, he was the treasurer of Egypt before he became the ruler. He was the treasurer. He was the financial, basically, guru of Egypt. So that's that language he knew how to speak that. And the Prophet ﷺ had to hear someone talking about this because he was going to run a country. And if he didn't have a financial plan, it would be very easy for things to fall to pieces. Another thing that he wanted to learn from Yusuf was his extreme forgiveness. You see, Yusuf ﷺ forgave his family eventually, right? He told them, لا تثريب عليكم يغفر الله لكم وهو أرحم الراحمين. I don't hold you accountable for what you did to me. May Allah forgive you, and He is the most forgiving. Yusuf ﷺ, at the end of his story, forgave his people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that the Prophet ﷺ, at the end of his story, was going to be given the opportunity to either punish the people who oppressed them or forgive them. So the Prophet ﷺ got to speak to the person who got over it. Got over his siblings who threw him into a well and left him to die. And called him a thief. And continued to tell his father lies about him. Yusuf found a way to get over that and forgive them and unite his family. The Prophet ﷺ absolutely had to be Yusuf. I remember when I was going through this when I was younger, I couldn't figure out why he had to be Yusuf, but then when I thought about it, like, what am I doing? There's a million reasons why he would be Yusuf. I said there's so many things you learn from him. Another thing is the ethical impeccability that Yusuf had. Yusuf had that moral standard that never changed. Go to his story. Yusuf as a slave, Yusuf as a young man, Yusuf as someone being pursued by foreign women, continued to hold on to his chastity and his morals and his ethics. He never budged. He didn't become a tyrant when he became a ruler. He wasn't disgruntled when he was in jail. He didn't become less helpful when he was being oppressed or mistreated or poor. He held his ethics all throughout his life, and that is a big part of being a Muslim. The Prophet meeting Yusuf would be given the opportunity to think about and see the person who did that. And we do have one narration about this, about him meeting Yusuf. فصعدت إلى السماء الثالثة فإذا أنا بنبي الله يوسف فما رأيت رجلا خلقه الله هو أجمل منه. Then I looked at Yusuf and I've never seen in my life any human being created by Allah that's more beautiful than him. Right? And in other narrations, he would say, فَوَكَانَ وَإِنَّ أَشْبَهَهُ بِهِ لَحْيَةٌ. You would point out one of the Sahaba who he thinks is the closest he could tell to his فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ شَطْرَ الْجَمَالِ. He was given half of mankind's beauty. And some scholars say, that's of his humbleness, because no one is as beautiful as he was. And it's not about the physical features of the face. It was of the rahmah and the humbleness and the nur that was in his face. As Jabir ibn Samurah would tell us, I was walking one day towards the moon. It was a full moon night. I was walking towards the moon. The Prophet would come from that direction. يقول فأخذت أنظر إلى القمر وأنظر إلى وجه رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام. I would look at the moon. I would look at the face of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. قلت والله لوجه رسول الله أجمل في عيني من القمر. And I told the Prophet ﷺ's face in my eye was more beautiful than the moon. صلى الله عليه وسلم. يقول أبو هريرة كأن الشمس تجري في عروقه. You feel like the sun runs in his face. And it's not an issue of physical beauty, it's an issue of enlightenment. It's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts in the face and the heart of the person. That has nothing to do with how big their nose is or how thick their lips are or what symmetry exists between their eyes and their ears. It's just something that is seen, that the heart sees, not the eyes. So he met Yusuf, the political and financial leader. He goes to the fourth sky. Who does he meet in the fourth sky? Idris alayhi salam. He meets Idris alayhi salam. And why is he meeting Idris alayhi salam? I would have substituted Noah for this one. There are two reasons why he met Idris alayhi salam. Two important reasons. That if you study, you go and you read Bidayah wa Nihaya ibn Kathir, or any of the books that talked about the stories of the prophets alayhi salam that are written by our scholars, that Idris was known for two specific things. Idris was the first documenter. Idris was the أول من خط بالقلم. The first one to write with a pen and document things was Idris alayhi salam. And this was going to be a hallmark of his ummah alayhi salatu wasalam, is the documentation. The reason Islam is what it is today, the reason I sit here and I talk to you and I tell you all these stories and I'm very certain about them and clear, is because Islam was documented. Because the Quran was written initially. And then the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, a century or and a half later, was written. And then all of the ilm that was the scholars extracted from these two sources of evidence was written and documented. So we have documentation. So we know. So we got that documentation is why I can sit here and tell you these stories. Because the human brain can only hold on to so much before it forgets everything. If you depended on the human brain, maybe half the Quran would have reached us. That's it. But because they documented everything, they wrote it down. They wrote their contracts, and they wrote their covenants, and they wrote their knowledge. And Idris was the first one to do that, which is why Idris alayhi salam had a certain significance in the history of Islamic law, of prophetic law. And the Prophet alayhi salam meeting him and learning that piece was of significance. Because his deen alayhi salam, his legacy, was going to be preserved through documentation, through the ability of keeping track of what actually was happening. What was happening. Imagine if it didn't. SubhanAllah. Imagine if Islam went through what Christianity went through initially, or Judaism, where they didn't write anything. And then a couple of centuries later they decided, we should probably write some of this stuff. So everyone wrote whatever they remembered, and ended up with 50 or 70 different versions of the same story that don't really seem to be the same story anymore. Like they're so different that they don't even seem to be similar. But because of that documentation that happened up front, and the documentation didn't have to start in Mecca, by the way. Right? They weren't documenting things in Mecca. They started documenting things in Medina. The Prophet ﷺ got people to sit down and write in Medina. In Mecca, he had لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به إن علينا جمعه وقرآنه فإذا قرأناه فاتبع قرآنه ثم إن علينا بيانه. So the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, was a Meccan surah, whenever he memorized ﷺ, he had the full Quran, the Meccan Quran. Nothing was written. Once he went to Medina ﷺ, he got the Sahaba to sit down and he would recite Surah Al-An'am and Surah Al-A'raf and the Meccan Quran, and they wrote it all down. Right? The documentation began in Medina after he met Idris. The second thing Idris is known for, Idris was the first mujahid. Idris. The first person to mount a horse for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was Idris. Has he done this so far, alayhi salatu wasalam? No. Has he carried a sword for the sake of Allah yet? No. Up till now, the rule that you have to adhere to is that there's no violence whatsoever. Right? But very soon, فلما كتب عليهم القتال إذا فريق منهم يخشون الناس كخشية الله أو أشد خشية وقالوا ربنا لما كتبت علينا القتال لولا أخرتنا إلى أجل قريب قل متاع الدنيا قليل والآخرة خير لمن اتقى ولا تظلمون فتيلا. The Prophet would say that the Sahaba, not all of them most of them were not super happy when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that now you bear arms. Now you mount your horses and you fight for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You defend yourself, you defend your country, and you go after those who are oppressing others. The Sahaba are like, can we not do this? Everything is so nice and cozy the way it is. Do we not have to? Why are we being asked to fight? No, the Muslims never. It's important to understand that the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims did not enjoy the concept of fighting. Combat is not something they looked forward to. No. It's something they had to do. But when they did it with the right intention. They did it in the right method for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ met Idris, the first person to ride a horse in combat for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to understand the concept of what combative jihad would actually look like, and learn what the ethics that come with that would be, and how to deal with this topic. Before I move on from the story of Idris, I'll tell you it's not necessarily a part of the Seerah, but I think it's a nice story to tell you. It's also told to us by Ka'b al-Ahbar. It's an Israeli story, from Israeliyat. So it's from the books of Yahud and Nasara. So we don't necessarily have, I don't have an authentic chain of narration for it with Islam, but I don't have any reason not to narrate it. I think it's a cool story. But Idris alayhi salam in his life, and because he had achieved these things, he was the first person to document it, the first person to mount a horse for the sake of Allah, and he had achieved a lot in his life, and he brought together the sons and daughters of Adam alayhi salam during his time. And these was not very far away from Adam in terms of his life. He achieved so much that Jibreel told him, why don't you, there was one of the Malaika that Idris had a friendship with, and he said, Ya Idris, maybe ask Allah to give you more time to live. You have done so many good things. The longer you live, the more good you will do. Maybe you should live longer. Maybe you live longer. And the enemy doesn't like to die anyways. So Idris liked the idea. فقال إذا أردت أخذتك إلى ملك الموت فسألته, how about I take you to the angel of death, and you can ask him yourself. Maybe to request an extension from the angel of death for a couple of years or whatever. فقال إدريس, sure. So he gets on the back of the angel takes him. They're looking for Malak al-Maut and they can't find him in the dunya. So they go up to this first sky, they can't find him. They go up to the second sky, they can't find him. They go up to the fourth sky and they find Malak al-Maut there. And the Malak calls upon the angel of death. Assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum. The angel says, no, I'm too busy. I don't have time. I have something to do. I know, I want to talk to you for a minute. I have Idris and he has a question. So Malak al-Maut holds the who do you have? I have Idris. فقال ملك الموت, the angel of death said, Subhanallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded me to go and take Idris's spirit in the fourth sky, and I said to myself, how am I going to take in the fourth sky? He's on earth. And that's where Idris alayhi salam died. You can't cheat fate. You can't cheat death. You can't cheat it. When it's time, it's time. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees that it's time for you to go, you're going to go. So don't waste too much time worrying about it. Worry about whether you're doing what is required to make it across the finish line. That's what you should worry about. When you go is whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls upon your soul to come home. And that can happen when you're really old. It can happen when you're really young. It can happen sometime between. It can happen swiftly. It can happen slowly. Allahu a'lam. It's whatever He wants subhanahu wa ta'ala. So since you can't control that piece, just focus on what you can control, which is what you do, how you live, the time that you have right now. And just invest in that. Invest in being the best person you can be today. Invest in being the most kind person, the most pious and close to Allah person that you can be today. So that when it's time, you have no regrets. You have nothing to say, I wasted that much time. Don't waste time. Spend it doing a good thing. So when it's time calls, I have to leave. I'm doing what I would do anyways. One of the practices it's a very advanced practice. I don't think I've given it in this masjid to any of the groups that I teach yet. But we will tell them. Is where you live a day as if it's your last. You choose a day within the month. You plan it out where you don't have where you're not you don't have a deadline like the next, because you're not going to be able to do this if you have a deadline the next day or you have an exam. So you look for a day that works for you, that's appropriate. Usually the Shaykh will help you out. And then you live that day as if you're going to die before you wake up the next morning. Right? And just to allow your brain to function that way a little bit. And it's a very, very rejuvenating experience. It's very, very helpful. It's one of the most helpful experiences, but it does require a certain degree of comprehension of Islamic topics in order for you to do it well. And you have to have it. But if you do it in your life, it helps you maybe start living that way in general. You start to find out that there's a lot of aspects of living your final day that you could live in every day, that you just choose not to for no good reason. And then you can, if you actually take time to think about it, it's very anyways. So the Prophet ﷺ has that discussion with Idris. He hears about documentation, he learns about jihad, and then he goes into the sky where he meets Harun alayhi salam. And again, a choice that I didn't see. I always thought it was interesting. Why Harun alayhi salam? Harun, you see, who talks about Harun? When you talk about Judaism, you talk about Harun. No, who do you talk about? He gets all the glamour. Right? Harun it's like Batman or Robin. He's the sidekick. He gets forgotten. Even though he's a full prophet of Allah, he's a full messenger. He received wahi from Jibreel. وَأَرْسَلْنَا مَعَهُ أَخَاهُ هَارُونَ نَبِيًّا. He was a Nabi, alayhi salatu wasalam. But he doesn't get remembered. No one talks about Harun. They talk about Musa and what Musa did, what Musa taught, what Musa brought. Harun is forgotten. Harun worked behind the scenes. Harun was the educator behind these. Harun is the example of someone who was selfless, who lived his life in piety, in messaging, someone who received revelation and did his job and got very little recognition for it in his life, and was okay with that. It wasn't a hindrance. He wasn't disgruntled. He didn't feel like he had to fight for his spot. He didn't feel like he had to try and outshine Musa. No, he was okay. He was okay with being the right hand of his younger brother. His younger brother. He was okay with that. He was okay being the person whose name was not going to be celebrated in the large groups. He was not Azam the Rusul. He was okay with that. That required a certain degree of selflessness that doesn't exist in most people's hearts. But Harun had that in him. And the Prophet meeting someone like that, that's important. Because that's who he was, when you study his life, you find that in him. He left the world with nothing. Like, he didn't cash in ever. And Harun is the example of someone never cashed in. And Yahud know that. You know how we know that they know that? When they talked to Maryam when they accused her of doing something wrong, what did they tell her? They said, Ya ukhta Harun. Ya ukhta Harun, ma kana abuki imra'a sawin wa ma kanat ummuki baghiya. It's like saying, you acted all your life as if you were the sister of Harun. In what way? In your selflessness and in your ethics and you were acting like that. They were accusing her of haram and saying your whole life you're acting like your ukht Harun. She didn't have a brother called Harun. No, it was referring to Harun alayhi salam, the prophet, because he was known amongst the Yahud to be someone of such tenderness and such selflessness, because he didn't ask for anything for himself alayhi salatu wasalam. It's like he was the example of scholarly knowledge. Harun was the alim. Harun was a person who taught, who spent his life in education. Musa alayhi salam was saving Bani Israel from Fir'aun, was getting them across the sea, was getting to the Masjid al-Aqsa, where he was meeting. Musa alayhi salam had a million musibah he had to deal with. Harun was the educator. Harun was the scholar who sat and taught the generations of Bani Israel until he died doing so. He was the caregiver of Bani Israel in his life. And that scholarly knowledge is what the Prophet ﷺ would carry in his life, and meeting Harun was of value. The third reason is that Harun was the public speaker. Musa wasn't. Musa said it very clearly. وَيَضِيقُ صَدْرِي وَلَا يَنْطَلِقُ لِسَانِي فَأَرْسِلْ إِلَىٰ هَارُونَ. I don't know how to. I'm not an articulate person as much as I need Harun. Harun knows how to speak. Harun was the orator. He would get on the minbar and he would speak. And he got the people to listen to him. And Harun is the person who rallied the Banu Israel from Musa alayhi salam. Harun is the one who did the public speaking. The Prophet alayhi salam obviously is going to have Jumu'ah very soon. Yeah, has he given a Jumu'ah so far? No. So far no Jumu'ahs has been given. I've been given his life alayhi salam. But very soon he was going to be known alayhi salam for his public speaking. He was going to be famous in Arabia for the khutbahs he gave. People would memorize what he said and go and spread it amongst Arabia, and that would become what he would be known for in his life, alayhi salatu wasalam. And meeting Harun, who was that person, who was the public speaker, who knew how to address people. Harun was the guy with the open dialogue. Harun was the one who sat down and discussed and argued and went back and forth with Banu Israel. Musa alayhi salam didn't. Musa alayhi salam came in with the hammer. Musa went, no, this is what we're doing. Everyone got in line. Harun was sat there and he discussed and he argued. And he went back and forth and he listened and he brought adillah. Now, our deen is based on that. Our deen is not that way. The way he did it, alayhi salatu, was not going to be that. You walk in, you dictate how it's going to happen. That's not how leadership was going to work. It was going to be similar to Harun. Because why he met Harun, alayhi salam. There was a reason why he met Harun. Because the way Harun did things, a lot of that was going to be what he was going to do in his life, alayhi salatu wasalam, later on. He would go to the sixth sky, alayhi salatu wasalam. Who does he meet there? His brother. He meets Musa alayhi salam, the sixth sky. You would think one brother's enough, but no, he would go and meet Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. He has to meet Musa alayhi salam. That's a no-brainer. He's obviously going to meet Musa alayhi salam. Of course, there's no prophet in the Quran that is talked about that comes even remotely close to Musa alayhi salam. Like, there's Musa, then a huge drop, and then you have all the other prophets. A huge drop, like there's no competition. Like Musa alayhi salam is talked about 72 places in the Quran. The closest is 10 or 12 after that. Like there's no competition. Musa alayhi salam is everywhere in the Mus'haf. His story is repeated time and time again from every angle. His story is analyzed from every angle. And the Prophet ﷺ, because of the similarity of their stories, because Musa ﷺ, he was removed from his people, because Musa ﷺ had to stand up against his family. Musa ﷺ had two Sahibul Marhalatayn, had two sections of the story. The story where he was standing up against tyranny, and the story where the tyrants were his own people, where the tyranny happened within. The Prophet ﷺ had same thing, two phases in his story. The story where he's in Mecca, he's standing up against tyrants, and the story where the problem is from his own, the munafiqeen amongst his own ranks. So being able to be flexible and move from one mindset to the other within a lifetime is not easy. So he met Musa ﷺ, who had two different sets of difficulties. And I'm sure Musa was like, honestly, Fir'aun was better than Musa. I preferred Fir'aun's problems. I think the other problems were much more better. And the Prophet ﷺ probably felt the same way. At a certain point in his life, he may have found that dealing with Quraysh was less difficult than dealing with some of the munafiqeen that claimed to be a part of his nation but didn't carry their own weight. But weren't willing to put in the buy-in for what Islam actually was. So he's the most similar to the Prophet ﷺ in terms of the story. And Musa ﷺ is the exemplar of the social leader, of a social leader. Yusuf was the political, financial leader, right? Harun was the scholar, and Musa was the social leader. There's a difference. Social leadership requires you. I remember when I came here, and I came here in 2013, and Sheikh Jamal I just left the city. I remember when I asked people, and I didn't ask people. I'm sorry, I didn't ask. I just listened. People would talk to me, and they would all miss having Sheikh Jamal. And Sheikh Jamal wasn't someone who necessarily did a lot of halaqah and teaching. He was a social leader. He knew people. He went to their homes. He performed the marriages. He visited the ill. He did a lot of that type of work. And that work actually is what brings people together. It brings communities together and unites communities. And Musa was a social leader. He was someone who was on the ground with the people, dealing with them, helping with their daily problems. And we need that. In order for communities like this one to work, you can't have one or two or three. You need an army of imams. You need a couple. You need a bunch of imams who can focus on different aspects of what imama is. Because it's like when you look at the Prophets, a lot of this came into the life of one person. We're not good enough. So you need one person who sits down and does the lectures and the teaching, and one person who does I need people who take on different specialties, but you need a social leader. Someone who relates to people and people relate to them on a social level. Who goes into their homes and gets to know them and does the counseling and helps the marriages and fixes the problems between the parents and the younger and fixes the problems between families and that's what Musa ﷺ did. That's like Musa ﷺ could just walk in, we walked into a place, everyone shut up, everyone listened. Because Musa ﷺ, not only was he strong in his character, but Musa ﷺ had invested in his people. He invested for so long, taking care of them, that they felt ashamed whenever he said anything. So they would disobey him behind his back, not to his face. They wouldn't dare do it to his face because he had invested so much and they were all embarrassed of him. Because he took care of them so much, and they couldn't bring themselves to disobey him to his face, so they waited for him to go somewhere, and then they would go ahead and do something stupid. But when he came back, immediately it would be done. Because he had too much leverage. They owed him, from a social perspective. And that was very, and I remember a lot of my teachers were like that. A lot of my teachers know when I look back. I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do it, by the way. I'm saying that this is what Musa did, and I'm not going to do it at all. But there's not enough time in the world to do this stuff. But we do need people who will, for sure. We need imams and scholars who will do this type of work because this work is important. But a lot of my teachers were like that. When I spent days with them, for example, my days to spend with them from Fajr, for example, to the next Fajr, there was a reasonable portion of their day that included visits. Like home visitations and hospital visitations. They would go and they would visit people who were ill or visit people who had problems, or they would go and attend certain social functions and be a part of their social gatherings. But subhanAllah, it's very, very valuable. That being said, try to keep me out of these as much as possible. Get married, I'll be happy for you. You don't have to call me, and I'm good, inshallah. But we do need people to do more of this work for sure. And Musa had that social leadership, and I think something the Prophet was going to learn. When you look, everything I'm telling you about what these prophets were, you can see the reflection within his life in Medina later on. You see the Prophet going to the ahya. This is what the wording of Anas was. قال فكان يزور الأنصار في بيوتهم ويذهب إلى أحيائهم ويتفقد أحوالهم. He would go and he would visit the Ansar in their homes and enter their neighborhoods and ask about how they were doing. He would go and he would get to know the family structure, the fabric of his own society, and who was doing well and who wasn't doing well, and why weren't they doing well, and what did they need, and how was the infrastructure, and where were people living, and did they have the proper resources, and were they working, and did they have enough money? He would get to know these aspects of their lives and allow them to make decisions. Our politicians today aren't social leaders. They're not social. They're social leaders during the period of where they need a vote. When they campaign, they're social leaders. They'll kiss the babies and they'll stand and show that they carry the shovels. But once they get voted in, they're not interested in it. They don't care. It doesn't. And that's where we have. They don't know. People, when you know what's happening on the law, when you're actually forced to see it, or you have to go and witness it or experience it, only sociopaths, only psychopaths will not respond with some degree of compassion or support. It's impossible. But when you distance yourself, like you can only not care about what's happening in Gaza if over the last 9 months you did not watch TV at all. Like you didn't have a big screen. You don't look at a screen, you have no idea what's happening there. You'll be fine. You don't need to care about this. But if you're seeing what's going on an ongoing basis, it's impossible for you to distance yourself from what's actually occurring. It's impossible. It's too much. It's too difficult. It's too hard. And that's where social leadership comes. And you have to be a part of what's happening in the community. Shuyukh who get stuck inside masajid, who don't know what's happening, their ear is not on the ground, they're not listening, they're not seeing what's happening. They lose touch, they lose focus, and they lose relevance to their community. They don't know what's actually happening. They don't know what the struggles are. They don't know what people are going through, so they can't offer solutions. So their khutbah become irrelevant, and people don't listen anymore. So that social leadership was a big deal. He goes to the seventh, to the final heaven, he enters, and he meets. Who does he meet? His role model. He is our role model, but he had his own role model as well. He had someone he looked up to. He looked up to his great-grandfather Ibrahim. He got to look up to Ibrahim. And for him, I think probably the most emotional meeting he had up there was meeting Ibrahim. Even though he met his father, Adam, the father of us all. But what he really, in his mind, in his heart, he wanted to meet Ibrahim. He got to meet his father Ibrahim, the Muslim, the first Muslim. هو سماكم المسلمين من قبل وفي هذا. Ibrahim used the word Muslim, the ones who submit. When is Muslim? I feel like it's 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Is it 8?
54.
54. Okay. He's the first Muslim, the first one to use the term. The concept has always been there. All of the prophets of God were people who submitted to Allah. But the first one to use the word Muslim and say that those who follow me are Muslims, are people who submit their will to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was Ibrahim. He is the Imam. وإذ قال ربك إني جاعلك للناس إماما. I'm going to make you for people a leader, an exemplar. Someone who will lead by example. Ibrahim was the Imam. Ibrahim was the Ummah. إن إبراهيم كان أمة قانتا لله. Ibrahim, the weight of his iman was as the weight of the iman of a ummah, of a nation of people. Ibrahim's influence, Ibrahim's impact was the impact of a nation, not of one person. So the Prophet was able to say, يقول فإذا بإبراهيم قد أركى ظهره على البيت المعمور وأمامه أطفال. He's sitting, Ibrahim a.s., and he's reclining with his back to Al-Bayt al-Ma'mur. Al-Bayt al-Ma'mur is the equivalent of the Kaaba up in the seventh heaven. It's the equivalent of the Kaaba up there. Ibrahim spent all his life building it, preparing it, so he gets to recline upon it. So he's sitting there, and in front of him are the children of the Muslimin who die. The children who die when they're young, and they're playing in front of him. And he gets to speak to Ibrahim. And he gets to learn what it means to be an imam. What it means to be a Muslim. What it means to have an ummah. And I can't even begin to imagine what they talked about. But we do have a narration. We do have one narration, like an authentic narration from the collection of Tirmidhi, from this incident where the Prophet alayhi salam goes and he meets Ibrahim alayhi salam. So he tells him, "Marhaban bin Nabi al-Salih wa ibn al-Salih." Welcome the pious prophet and the pious son. And يقول لقيت إبراهيم ليلة أسري بي فقال يا محمد, we told him, قال يا محمد أقرئ أمتك مني السلام. Grant, take my salam back to your ummah. So عليك السلام يا إبراهيم. So give salam back to Ibrahim alayhi salam. He sends his salam to you through the Prophet alayhi salam. وأخبرهم أن الجنة طيبة التربة وأنها عذبة الماء قيعان. Tell them that the Jannah is very fertilized soil, and that there's a lot of pure water, and then it's open landscape, it's open land, but it's empty. وأن غراسها سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. And that what plants the trees in it. Like Jannah is beautiful, but it needs to be filled up with life. You want to fill it up with life? Subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar. You say that and you fill the Jannah. When you go there, you find the benefit of the words that you said in dunya. And that's what he sent us, alayhi salatu wasalam. He sent his salam to the ummah of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, and gave you a piece of advice. Really what he's telling you is stay focused on your prize. Stay focused on the prize. It's coming later. What you're building, what you're investing in, where you're planting your trees is not here. Even though we take care of this plant, but you're investing in what's coming later. Don't lose track and sight of what is coming next. And